In the world of thoroughbred racing, legends are forged by victory, but one New York gelding became famous for never crossing the wire first, not even once in 100 tries. Zippy Chippy, boasting the blood of champions, was swapped for a used pickup and entered a lifelong losing streak that only made his bond with his trainer stronger. How did a horse bred for glory become America's most beloved underdog? And what drove his owner to keep believing? To find out, make sure you like and subscribe. Let's start at the very beginning of an extraordinary losing streak. Capritor Farm in upstate New York, spring of 1991. In a foaling barn surrounded by the quiet confidence of seasoned breeders, a bay colt took his first shaky steps. His name would be Zippy Chippy, and on paper, he looked like a sure thing. His sire, Compliance, was a son of Northern Dancer, one of the most influential stallions in the history of thoroughbred racing. Compliance's family tree glittered with names like El Gran Señor and Try My Best, horses who had left their mark on tracks from Europe to America. Even closer to home, Compliance sired Four-Star Dave, known as the Sultan of Saratoga, a beloved New York legend known for his heart and grit. On the dam side, Zippy Chippy carried the blood of Listen Lady, herself a link to some of racing's most celebrated lines. Through Listen Lady, the pedigree reached back to Bold Ruler, the sire of Secretariat, and to Buckpasser, War Admiral, Man o' War, and Native Dancer. Each ancestor added weight to the expectation that this colt was born for the winner's circle. Breeding catalogs and farm ledgers told a story of potential, a 5-generation chart that read like a who's who of American racing royalty. By the standards of Capritor Farm, Zippy Chippy was supposed to be a ticket to the big leagues. Breeders and buyers looked at his ancestry and saw the promise of speed, stamina, and glory. Yet as the months passed, it became clear that this young horse was not interested in following anyone's script. Even in his earliest days, Zippy Chippy showed flashes of stubbornness. He was known to test the patience of grooms and handlers, doing things only when he felt like it. But with a pedigree so deep, few could imagine that greatness might not be guaranteed. In the world of thoroughbreds, bloodlines are everything, or so everyone thought. By 1995, Zippy Chippy had already run in 20 races without a single victory. His name was barely known outside the barns and backstretch, and his value had dropped to almost nothing. At the Fossig-Tipton New York May sale that year, he changed hands for just $2,500, a fraction of what his pedigree suggested he might one day be worth. But even that price did not stick. Not long after, a man named Felix Monserrate made a deal that would become racing legend. He traded his white 1988 Ford pickup truck for the stubborn bay gelding, a transaction that raised more eyebrows than hopes. For Monserrate, the swap was not just about acquiring another horse. He saw something in Zippy that others missed. Maybe it was the spark behind the horse's wary eyes, or the way he responded to his young daughter Marisa, who could walk into Zippy's stall and turn the so-called rogue gentle with a touch. Montserrat chalked up Zippy's failures to poor handling, not a lack of talent. He believed that, with patience, the right care, and a little luck, this horse could still prove everyone wrong. The pickup truck was more than just a vehicle. It was a symbol of what Montserrat was willing to give up for a chance at redemption. The decision was not rational in racing terms. Zippy's record was a string of losses, and the risks were obvious. But Montserrat's persistence would become the backbone of Zippy Chippy's story. With the truck gone and the horse in his barn, Montserrat prepared for the next chapter, determined to coax greatness, or at least effort, from a horse nobody else wanted. September 1994, Belmont Park. Zippy Chippy stepped onto the racetrack for the first time, his name barely noticed among the field. The official chart summed up his debut with 2 words: lacked rally. It was a phrase that would become a kind of shorthand for his entire racing career. Lacked rally would follow him like a quiet warning. From the start, Zippy's races followed a pattern that left trainers scratching their heads and bettors shaking their slips. He did not bolt from the gate with the urgency of a horse hungry for the lead. More often, he broke slowly, sometimes hesitating, sometimes trailing the field by several lengths before he even seemed to realize the race had started. Jockeys tried coaxing, urging, even yelling. They reported that Zippy could feel like 2 different horses in the same race. Sometimes he would put in a brief, honest effort mid-race only to flatten out before the finish. Other times, he seemed content to lope along at the back, indifferent to the competition. The racing charts began to fill with phrases like "never a threat," "failed to menace," and "no response." No response summed up the frustration. Some horses break slowly out of nerves or inexperience, but Zippy's gate antics felt like a choice. There was no panic, no wild veering, just a kind of stubborn patience, as if he had decided the race would start when he was ready. On days when he did get moving, the hope in the grandstand was almost audible. For a few strides, he would close the gap, his stride lengthening, only to ease off just when it mattered most. Jockeys passed along notes to each other. "Don't expect much early. He will test you at the gate. If he runs, it is on his terms." The betting public caught on quickly. Zippy's odds drifted higher with each start, but a handful of loyal fans kept backing him, convinced that one day everything would click. Odds and loyalty became part of his story. His early record was a string of losses, but not for lack of trying by those around him. Trainers tweaked equipment and race tactics, hoping to unlock some hidden spark. Some thought a new jockey might make the difference. Others believed a change in distance or track would suit him, but the pattern held. Every time the gates opened, Zippy Chippy followed his own internal clock, running only when and if he felt like it. In the language of the racetrack, his chart lines became legend. Lacked rally was more than a technical note. It was a window into the mystery of a horse who refused to follow the script. Yet, with each defeat, the sense grew that maybe, just maybe, the next start would be different. The hope lingered, and so did Zippy Chippy. At Finger Lakes on a gray autumn afternoon, Zippy Chippy barreled down the stretch, ears pinned, legs churning, the finish line just a few strides away. The crowd's hopeful roar built with every step. For a moment, it looked like the impossible might happen. But at the wire, another horse edged ahead by less than a length. The official margin, 3/4 of a length. Zippy settled for second. This scene played out again and again. 8 times, Zippy Chippy finished second. 12 times he crossed the line in third. In one race, he lost by just a head, less than the length of a bridle. Track announcers called his name with rising excitement, only to sigh as another runner surged past. The fans in the stands, some clutching tickets with his number, felt their hopes rise and fall with every near miss. Each time he finished close, the belief grew. Maybe next time would be different. Felix Monserrate watched these races with a mix of pride and heartbreak. He saw the flashes of speed, the moments when Zippy seemed to remember his royal pedigree. In a 6-furlong sprint at Northampton Fair, Zippy broke well, stalked the leaders, and made a move around the far turn. For a few heartbeats, he was in front. But as the field thundered home, He eased up, letting two rivals slip by in the final yards. The difference between victory and another defeat was measured in inches and seconds, sometimes less than a blink. Race after race, Zippy's best efforts fell just short. The racing charts tell the story in cold numbers: 8 seconds, 12 thirds, 20 times in the money. But for Montserrat and Zippy's growing circle of fans, each close call was a reason to keep believing. The horse had heart, and he had talent, just not quite enough to cross the line first. Still, the hope never faded. Every near miss was another reason to come back, to try again, to believe that the next start could be the one that rewrote history. At Finger Lakes in 1998, the tension between Zippy Chippy's quirks and the expectations of the racing world reached a breaking point. By then, his habit of lingering in the starting gate had become a spectacle of its own. Sometimes he would stand motionless as the others thundered away, leaving the starter and the crowd in a state of disbelief. Track stewards reviewed the tapes, watched the replays, and debated whether he was simply stubborn or something more complicated. Each refusal disrupted the flow of the races and raised uncomfortable questions about fairness for bettors and the integrity of the sport. Officials at Finger Lakes had seen enough. That year, after yet another refusal to break, they issued a ban. Zippy Chippy was no longer welcome to compete at the track. The notice was not couched in anger, but in the dry language of racing regulation, a necessary step, they argued, to preserve the orderly conduct of the meet. For the stewards, the decision was about maintaining standards. For Zippy Chippy's owner, Felix Monserrati, it was a blow that stung on more than just a professional level. The ban was not statewide, but it effectively shut Zippy Chippy out of his home circuit. The local racing community was split. Some regulars in the grandstand grumbled that the decision was overdue, while others felt a pang of sympathy for the gelding who had become a sort of folk hero, if not for his speed, then for his sheer persistence. A few bettors, who had long since learned to treat Zippy Chippy's odds as a curiosity, protested that racing would be less colorful without him. Newspaper columns and radio shows picked up the story, framing it as both a comic oddity and a small tragedy. For Monserrati, the pressure mounted. The cost of keeping Zippy Chippy in training was real, and now the most accessible venue was closed to them. But walking away was not an option. Instead, he began hauling Zippy Chippy to smaller fairs and tracks that would still accept his entry. Each new venue brought fresh challenges and a different crowd, but the pattern of behavior remained. The ban from Finger Lakes became a turning point, not just in Zippy Chippy's racing campaign, but in his reputation. He was no longer just a horse who could not win. He was now the horse who had been officially told to try his luck somewhere else. The story spread, and with it, public fascination grew. Zippy Chippy's legend was no longer confined to the backstretch. It had taken on a life of its own, fueled by the stubbornness of one horse and the unwavering loyalty of the man who refused to give up on him. Veterinarians and trainers who watched Zippy Chippy's long campaign found themselves facing a puzzle that numbers alone could not solve. A horse that ran 100 times without a win would usually be written off as fragile or unsound, yet Zippy's record told a different story. Over 11 seasons, he stayed healthy enough to keep entering the starting gate year after year. There were no reports of chronic lameness, no suspensory injuries, no significant layoffs that might suggest a hidden physical flaw. He was, by the standards of the sport, remarkably durable. But durability is only part of the equation. Racing is as much about will as it is about muscle and bone. In Zippy's case, the evidence pointed to something deeper than speed or stamina. He was a horse who, time and again, seemed to decide for himself when and if he would run. Track veterinarians, tasked with inspecting horses before each race, cleared him to compete not because he was fast, but because he was fit. Trainers and behavioral experts who studied his patterns noted that his refusals at the gate and his mid-race idling were not signs of pain or fear. Instead, they saw a horse whose motivation simply did not match the expectations set by his pedigree. In the language of equine behavior, Zippy Chippy became a case study in temperament. Some horses are born with a drive to chase, to lead, to fight for the wire. Others, like Zippy, seem content to jog along at their own pace, unmoved by the thunder of hooves around them. His quirks, his stubbornness, his gait antics, and his selective effort were not medical mysteries, but reflections of a strong-willed mind. For his handlers, this raised a difficult question. How do you train a horse who refuses to be convinced? The answer, as Montserrat would learn, came with a cost that went far beyond purse money or lost bets. Felix Montserrat kept Zippy Chippy in training year after year, even as the financial math grew more punishing with every start. Over a career that spanned 11 seasons, Zippy's total earnings barely cracked $30,834. For most small track owners, that sum would not cover the cost of keeping a horse in the barn, let alone hauling him to races across state lines. Daily board and training at tracks like Finger Lakes or Northampton could run from $40 to $80 a day, sometimes more. Farrier visits, routine vet care, entry fees, and travel expenses added up fast. When the numbers were penciled into a ledger, the reality was stark. Every month, Montserrat spent more on Zippy than he ever got back. But the story was never just about numbers. Zippy Chippy became a fixture in Montserrat's life, a constant presence through seasons of hope and disappointment. The horse who bit his trainer and balked at the gate could melt into gentleness when Montserrat's daughter Marisa came to visit. She was 7 years old when she first wandered into Zippy's stall, and instead of the usual mischief, Zippy lowered his head and let her stroke his nose. That moment, simple but unforgettable, convinced Montserrat that Zippy was more than a failed racehorse. In the quiet hours after the crowd had gone home, the bond between man and horse deepened, a stubborn loyalty that defied logic and outlasted every loss. The cost of keeping Zippy was measured in more than dollars and cents. It was a sacrifice of time, energy, and pride, a gamble that never paid off in the ways the racing world understood. Yet for Montserrat, Zippy was never just an entry on a balance sheet. He was family, and that was reason enough to keep going. Word started to spread far beyond the barns and backstretch. By 2000, Zippy Chippy's losing streak had become a punchline and a badge of honor, earning him a spot on People magazine's list of the year's most intriguing personalities. He was now a minor celebrity, the horse who couldn't win but never gave up. Local radio hosts joked about his record, while national outlets sent reporters to meet the stubborn gelding and the owner who wouldn't quit. Fans began to show up just to see Zippy run, carrying homemade signs and hoping to witness the impossible. The spotlight only grew as his career neared a milestone that few horses ever reach, his 100th start. The Northampton Fair in Massachusetts, known for its small purses and big-hearted crowds, became the stage for what many hoped would be a storybook ending. On September 10, 2004, Zippy Chippy stepped onto the track for his 100th official race. The energy in the stands was electric, fueled by years of near misses and a new wave of national attention. Bettors made him the second choice at 7-2, a nod to hope over history. In the lead-up, Zippy had already starred in headline-grabbing stunts. He beat a minor league baseball player in a 40-yard dash and outran a harness horse that started with a 20-length head start, proving he could run when he wanted to. But as the gates opened for race number 100, the old pattern returned. Zippy trailed the field, never threatening, and crossed the finish line last. The fairy tale ending slipped away, but the crowd cheered anyway. Zippy Chippy's quest was over. 100 starts, no wins. Yet in that moment, surrounded by fans and flashing cameras, he was more famous than any winner on the card. Every year, thousands of racehorses disappear from headlines the moment they stop winning. Yet Zippy Chippy's legend endures, not for victory, but for resilience and individuality. In a world obsessed with first place, his story reminds us that value is not measured by results alone. Sometimes, it is the ones who never win that leave the deepest mark. Think about what Zippy Chippy's legacy means to you. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe.